Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7 by 7 So last episode I know I said if there was one episode of Forces of Destiny that you absolutely had to watch, it would be Bounty Hunted, and I'm not moving away from that statement, but if you are a fan of Luke Skywalker, then you might want to check out The Path Ahead, which is episode 7 from season 2, and the reason why I say that is because not only does it feature Luke Skywalker as a character, but Mark Hamill is returning to provide the voice of Luke Skywalker for this episode. And the gist of the episode is that Luke is starting to be jumping through trees and climbing on vines and whatnot, and thinks that he can see a path through the trees, but is having trouble seeing it and is falling. And so Yoda says, well, take me with you and see what happens. And this appears to be the first time that Yoda climbs into the backpack. So we may actually be seeing the first instance of Luke carrying Yoda around in a backpack. Clearly, he is used to the idea by the time we see him in The Empire Strikes Back because of the way that they're running through the Dagobah swamps and Luke is doing front flips and Yoda is not flying out of the backpack due to centrifugal force or anything like that. No, he's already with the program on that one. And interestingly enough, when Obi-Wan covers Luke's eyes with the blast shield when they're doing their practice in the Millennium Falcon and A New Hope, you know, that has a parallel here in The Path Ahead, because not only does Yoda get into the backpack and Luke is trying to see the path ahead through the trees and whatnot, but Yoda reaches around and puts his hands over Luke's eyes. And so, you know, how is Luke supposed to see the path ahead? Well, apparently he is familiar with the idea of having his eyes covered for stuff, because at that point he relaxes into the Force and he is able to run across tree branches and jump through giant, knotholes in trees and swing on vines and do things without any problem whatsoever. So apparently a blind Luke is actually a very good thing as far as sinking into the Force. And it also puts you in mind a little bit of Kanan Jarrus in Star Wars Rebels, and when he goes blind in the later seasons of Rebels, or rather that he's blinded in later seasons of Rebels, and how that actually seems to not hinder him at all when using the Force. In fact, it's almost a little bit better. And there's a lot of talk about, your eyes deceiving you, don't trust them, but it's not said in that particular way in this episode. The actual line from Tom Kane playing Yoda, Tom Kane did the voice of Yoda for the Clone Wars series, is trust what you see, don't trust what you think you see, which is kind of interesting. And he actually also says at one point to see inside the land. And he does that by closing his eyes, Luke does, and then by having his eyes covered, actually seeing inside of it with the Force, which is a different way of presenting things than has usually been presented. So a neat little perspective, and good fun to see Luke and Dagobah and Mark Hamill actually voicing the character. So that was very cool. And then we have Porg Problems, which is just about the Porgs for the most part. And if you remember in The Last Jedi, there was that moment where one of the Porgs was jumping on Luke's lightsaber, Rey's lightsaber, and you thought that there was a chance it was going to get turned on and impale another Porg looking at the end of it. Well, it turns out they can actually turn on those lightsabers, because while Rey is meditating and levitating rocks, the Porg get into her gear and they start jumping on the lightsaber and they actually activate it, but no Porg is standing near enough to get impaled by it. Again, it's Forces of Destiny. It's a webisode targeted for young kids, so we're not going to get to see a Porg done in like that, unfortunately. I mean, it would be fun to see, I guess. This also kind of gives you another reason why Chewie might be interested in cooking Porgs aside from general hunger, because they're a bit of a pest as far as these things go. Anyway, so a bunch of Porgs start running away with the lightsaber. One of them has the lightsaber in his mouth. So Porgs are apparently surprisingly powerful for their size, able to carry that heavy lightsaber. And they almost get away. And as Rey is chasing them toward the edge of a cliff, and you see Chewie and R2 doing repairs to the Falcon, and they're like, what is going on? But the last Porg is, running behind the rest of the gang because he's probably weighed down by that lightsaber. She's weighed down that lightsaber by the lightsaber, whichever gender that Porg happens to be. And as the Porg jumps out, Rey reaches out with the Force and freezes it in midair, and then strains to have the Porg drawn back to her. And she actually says, and this is Daisy Ridley doing the voice, says, "I didn't know I could do that." And so that gets into the whole situation that we got into with the Last Jedi novelization, actually, about how Kylo Ren's mind probe from The Force Awakens may have unlocked Rey's Force abilities in a way that she could not have previously done on her own, that he may have actually accelerated her realization and her ability to be somewhat adept with her Force abilities because of Kylo Ren breaking down barriers in her mind. And apparently the Porg must have some sort of hive mind situation, because all the other Porgs around happen to see Rey freeze the Porg in midair and drag him back through midair, because then all the other Porgs start swarming around and Rey jumping up and down and raising their little wings, fins. And it looks like they're like, hey, you know, throw me around in the air with the Force. So that could be rather interesting in its own right. And that is going to do it for The Path Ahead and Porg Problems from Forces of Destiny Season 2, Episodes 7 and 8. And over on the audio version of the podcast, we'll do Last Jedi trivia, so check that out, sw7x7.com/iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. But for now, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.